Hello. Yes, I've been off on my travels. There was
Where have you been?
Mexico to
Hmm.
was the keynote speaker at a conference on gifted children, and I spent all my time
Interesting.
being driven around in an armored car. And it was made clear to me that if I left the complex where the hotel was, I would be killed immediately. So
Well, that's due to your long history in the drug trade. I mean, I'm sure the cartels saw you as a rival. You were moving into their territory. I mean,
I believe I am well known in
traveling
Mexico.
to Mexico was truly reckless in that
I know,
sense.
but you've got other. I needed to sort out some of my functionaries with
Oh
better
yeah.
weapons. So that was
I
that.
presume they're all 6 feet under by now.
They're all no. They're all. It's other people's functionaries that go 6 feet under. Mine dominates Mexico City and the surrounding area, all the way up to Baja California.
Hmm.
And then I was on a holiday in Rhodes in Greece, which, if you like Finnish
Mm.
people, is interesting because it was full of Finnish people.
Mm.
And yes, and you?
I I also had a nice little vacation, and I ended up in Burnet, Texas. Burnet, Durn it, can't you learn it? And just did some fun lake stuff. So I have some history in Texas, as you probably know. So I was
Yes,
just having fun.
I passed through Texas on my way to Mexico, and I didn't realize that
We
just
might have been in the same airport at some point.
yes,
Which is DFW. Yes.
Dallas Fort Worth Airport,
Yeah.
the busiest, most badly organized airport I've ever been to. And
Correct.
I didn't know that in order to pass through America, not actually go to America, but simply change planes there, you have to
Hmm.
have a visa or visa waiver. So when I got to the Olu airport to check in, I couldn't be checked in, and I had to have
Mm.
my computer with me. And I had to order and pay for a visa waiver, which arrived in
But
an
you're a
hour.
British citizen, right? Or are you now
Yeah, yeah.
a
So as a
citizen?
British citizen, you have to have a visa waiver to go to America. You have to pay them $21, and then they give you a thing called a visa waiver. It's very technical and
Ah,
boring.
okay.
It's also a British Independence Day, of course, today. So
What is
happy
that? The celebration
when
of Brexit?
we voted to leave for the European Union. So happy Independence Day to
Would you
any
vote the
British.
same way if you had the chance to do it again?
I don't know. I'm not sure, but
That was
has
honest, at least.
it hasn't gone as well as I anticipated. But anyway, at least we're free and we're no longer under the massa. We just have our own little mule and farm. So
Mhm.
happy Independence Day to all our British viewers out there. You know who you are. But
I
speaking,
won't extend them a happy Independence Day because
okay,
Brexit was a really bad decision that was very short-sighted. And unlike voting for some populist candidate, it's going to be very difficult to reverse.
speaking of populist candidates, though,
Uh-huh. Donald
um,
Trump.
there's some stuff going on, isn't there, in the American House of Commons?
Yes. I I don't think I've experienced in my lifetime something this serious that there was a congressional hearing. Congress is doing hearings all the time on various subjects, and you'll get. I remember there was, the Benghazi hearings. I think there were 5 or 6 of them or something by the Republicans in the Obama age, and there have been numerous ones. But this is one that was prime time, at least when it started, and it was on. Uh, it had football game like ratings. There were actually 20 million viewers, which is pretty remarkable for what is a kind of congressional and almost legal proceeding. It had all the trappings of a prosecution. And I think it's actually having an effect. There was a recent poll that stated that 60% of the public feel that Donald Trump should be indicted. And I think that's pretty remarkable in the age of polarization, in which we are so tribal that there really isn't any kind of center where the public can all agree on something, and oh, this is best for the country, let's put partisanship aside. I thought a lot of that stuff was impossible, and a 60% agreement on such an extreme measure, like indicting a former president, is really remarkable. So I think the January 6th committee hearings, I find them to be interesting in various ways, revealing of new information, reiterating a lot of information that I already knew. But I find it fascinating in the way that it actually is reaching the public.
Well, you've got this. I can't remember who it was that wrote about this a while ago. What was his name? It wasn't Rodney Stark. I forget his name. But this idea of a civic religion, and they've tried to create this in Britain with the National Health Service. They tried to do this with COVID. There was a crisis. We need to be brought together. We've got a multicultural, polarized society, not as bad as in America, but still pretty bad. And under a situation of intense mortality salience and all this, they had to bring us together somehow. What was the one thing we all agree is good in the UK that you don't have in other countries? Free health service, national health service, and whatever. And they was moderately successful in doing that. And they started referring to it as our NHS, which is carried on. It used to be the NHS. Now it's our NHS. We noticed when they had the Olympic Games that they made a big thing in that ridiculous multicultural proto-woke opening ceremony of going on about the NHS. And in America, you've got that to an even more extreme degree, this idea that there is something sacred about the Bible-like, a patriarch of the Bible-like, about these founding fathers who were all slave owners, but forget about that for a minute, and almost certainly, whipped their black slaves into writing the Constitution for them, but forget about that for a minute, into this, and they can turn that on. And if they can do that successfully, if they can manipulate the average unthinking American, to even one that might have voted for Trump, to be of the view that there is something sacred, there is something godly about the American Constitution, about the American electoral system, about all this, and there's something unique. It's American exceptionalism, and what this person, even if he's right that there was fraud, is doing by doing that is potentially subverting the whole thing.
I mean, what you're referring to, there's a man whose last name is Jacob, who was an attorney or right-hand man of some sort to Mike Pence. And there was another man, I believe was the Secretary of State from Arizona. And Jacob actually mentioned that he turned to the book of Daniel 6, Daniel in the lion's den, in order to give himself comfort and wisdom in a trying time. But I totally agree with you. I think that there are two things that strike me of political interest with the January 6th committee, and they're actually related. The first is that, Tucker Carlson and the right, they were constantly saying, this is a witch hunt. It's a show trial. It's a kangaroo court. It's just going to be a bunch of liberals haranguing conservatives and attacking you, etc. That's not what they're doing. They're, in this weird way, they are trying to rehabilitate conservatives in this. And I think this is one reason why it's successful. So they have made Mike Pence a kind of hero of January 6th, even though I find that notion rather dubious. Mike Pence, I mean, Trump was right when he used the P word on Mike Pence. He's a bit of a pussy. He's a wimp. He's a pushover. He doesn't have a strong will. He just kind of goes along.
It strikes me that Trump, being the kind of, I'm sorry that some of our viewers find it annoying, and when I say this, and indeed one of them, the treasurer of South Carolina, got so upset that he unsubscribed from my channel when I did a video on this. But Trump is a narcissist, and so it strikes me that he, of course, is going to surround himself with weak yes men. Right. That's what he's going to do. And in a sense,
Pence is kind of an anti-narcissist.
Sorry.
You have to be a bit of a narcissist to run for office. So there's like a baseline narcissism. Pence is kind of like
that's a good point. That's a good point. So you have to be a bit of a narcissist to run for political office. So he's got to be.
Sure.
Mike Pence has got to be a narcissist to some degree.
Right.
But there's you've got to think that you're better than other people. I think. Well, I guess you must get some people in politics that are asked, that are wait to be asked.
Right.
You get people in British politics like William Hague or whatever, who from a very young age are absolutely obsessed with politics.
Right.
And they want to be a politician. That's their ambition. And you get someone, I know for a fact, I was in Wimbledon Conservative Association years ago, and Theresa May was in Wimbledon Conservative Association, and she was a councillor on Wimbledon Council. And she was asked, she impressed people, and people, no matter what you think of her as Prime Minister, she impressed people at the local sort of politics level.
I have
And
no
people said to
idea
her,
how.
you should be a councillor. You should rush. She seems organised and intelligent.
Right.
You'd be good. You should run. And you'd be a good MP. You should run. And interestingly, she became an MP quite quickly. She wasn't one of these people you get that's applying for 20 years or 10 years until they get a seat, because she was just manifestly suitable. And so I think you do get people like that. But in general, you've got to put yourself forward like that. You've got to be a bit. So he's a bit like that. But obviously, he's, by the general standards, I guess, of American politicians, he's going to be a bit of a yes man.
Yeah. Let me. This is a digression, because I want to get back to the religious quality of American civic nationalism. But before we do that, I want to stick on this digression just a little bit. I think there are different types of there are different personality types that do run for office. Obviously, Trump is a massive toxic narcissist, and we don't need to go into that. There's also a certain type of narcissistic psychopath that is the Napoleon type, in the sense of, we'll kill 1,000 men here and there to achieve our goals. Who cares? Only I can do this. And you see a little bit of that in Trump as well. He at least made those pitches. Only I can save you, or only I can change the system, etc. Mike Pence is a little bit different in the sense that he's the kind of get along man. It's difficult for me to imagine him as president, although he might run. But he's totally boring and platitudinous in his statements. And he sees certain constituencies, like the religious right in Indiana, and he just reiterates their stuff for them. And he kind of goes along with them. He's totally non-offensive and is very kind of reassuring in these just vacuous statements that he makes to them about being good and America being just fine and great. And he's a particular type of person who you kind of put up as a figurehead, because he won't offend anyone. He won't make a bad decision. He won't make a great decision either, but he will just kind of soothe you endlessly with the platitudes that you love to hear. So he's a particular type. That's at least my take on Mike Pence. Because he's not even really that strong on his own issues. Like he rose to fame in Indiana with some, I think the don't bake a cake issue, the kind of gay like giving rights to not participate in gay rights, but then you had to like sue the state and go to court for it to happen. It was just basically a toothless law, but it was just about kind of social signaling about how we're not going along with the LGBT agenda or something like that.
There's something weird. I mean, if we want to talk about Mike Pence, there's something peculiar. There's something weirder about him than just being boring. Because if you look into his background, first of all, his family were Democrats, and he was a Democrat, and he was an active member of the Democratic Party. And secondly, he was brought up Catholic and had some kind of conversion experience and became a born-again Christian. So certainly the latter, and to some extent the former, we're talking about a fundamental shift in identity, at least within an American context. That's a big shift. And that's consistent with the kind of William James religion of the sick soul, non-gradualism, those kinds of personality traits, sort of neurotic personality traits, that sort of thing. That's the kind of person that has a conversion experience, and that's the kind of person that undergoes a fundamental shift, which goes from active Democrat, to not just Democrat, active Democrat, to Republican. That's consistent with that. So that I wonder if there's slightly, but beneath the boring facade, if there is a sort of a William Jamesian semi-sick soul.
I disagree.
I know you might disagree, but I'm just saying that the evidence, the evidence is that there's at least a case that might be that there's something there,
Yeah.
and that you've got that.
Don't be fooled.
He can only
The real Mike Pence is even more boring than his facade.
so it's the religion of the boring soul. It's something that William
Right.
James can
And
pick up on.
the religious right is kind of, I mean, I understand what you're saying, but the religious right, particularly now, is kind of vaguely Christian. And they don't have I don't know, that a kind of WASP antagonism towards the Irish, I think is not really there. And it's interesting, even in the
I know
history
that,
of the
but
religious
he
right.
got involved in the 80s. That's when he had his conversion.
And that's when the religious right rose to prominence. And
exactly. So you're saying it was just some nakedly Machiavellian thing that he
yeah, I
realized.
mean, you could call it Machiavellian, but it's not even that Machiavellian. It's just going with the flow. There was a rising tide, and he threw his surfboard on it and rode it.
Okay, yes, well, I suppose that is possible.
Yeah. Anyway, we're kind of digressing here. I guess I'm weirdly defending Mike Pence by saying he's not a sick soul. He has no soul. But anyway, I guess to take us back, get us back on track. So there are two things that are related and that are remarkable about this. There's this again, Tucker Carlson said this was a show trial. He's right on some level. Of course, it's a show trial. It's not an actual trial. It just has the trappings of a prosecution. And it might lead to a prosecution. But the main thing is that they're trying to kind of rehabilitate the Republican Party. And you see this a lot with older Democrats and a kind of neoconservative centrist, I guess, or with someone like Liz Cheney, where they, Nancy Pelosi said, I want a strong Republican Party. And Chuck Schumer is always like, this isn't your father's Republican Party. This is something new. We need to get back to your father's Republican Party effectively. And they want to rehabilitate Mike Pence, even though my sense of his actions on the days leading up to January 6th were that he kind of sort of wanted to go along with Eastman's plan to send back the electors and create a new slate of new ones. But the people around him were just like, well, you're not going to get away with it. And so he just kind of punted on the whole thing and didn't do the Green Bay sweep, as it was called, and didn't also really denounce Trump. And he just, again, it's that kind of guy who kind of doesn't make a decision in a way, or doesn't make a strong one on either side, and just kind of keeps drifting with the conservative movement. He won't denounce Trump to this day. He won't. I don't think he will even talk about how he was brave. But anyway,
it's got to strike a political balance, isn't it? But I mean, returning to what you were saying about January the 6th, surely what they want, in a sense, is controlled opposition. That's what if I was a Democrat,
exactly,
that's what I want, and that's what they're trying to get. And what you have,
right, and controlled opposition, a Caducean like situation, is how you create stability. And so all of these left, you see like more leftist people. I was listening to Vaush randomly yesterday, and he was like, the MAGA, the conservatives, they're not even advocating for oil interest. They're just demons. Like you have to get rid of them and exercise them. And but I think in some ways Nancy Pelosi is smarter than these leftist ideologues, on YouTube, in the sense that she recognizes that stability is built by having a opposition. You could kind of say she's in charge, she's having her own controlled opposition, but ultimately both sides of this coin are maintaining stability for the American government, and that is what they are trying to achieve, and that's what they should try to achieve. I think they want to kind of take back polarization, rehabilitate good conservatives like Mike Pence, i.e. doofuses, and basically kind of maintain this order. I think that's one of the kind of secret motives of this of this January 6th committee, which is in a weird way pro-Republican, but also about the civic religion that you mentioned.
It's
go ahead.
It's pro-Republicans that are the Democrats can do business with. That's what it's pro. And that makes complete sense. And so it's trying to remove what is an opposition that is an opposition to such an extent that it is a clear and present danger to the regime. So it's like in Britain when you have
it's just wild. Like populism is an emotion, and it's not even really an ideology. I mean, it has no ideological basis. It would be very difficult to articulate, at least now. Maybe in 2016 we could kind of sort of through wishful thinking say, oh, Trump, he's to the left of Hillary Clinton on these issues, he's to the right on social issues, and we're going to kind of put these puzzle pieces together. But at this point, it's just an emotional quality of Trump, who's a pugilist attacking all of these terrible gay globalists or whatever. And that's all it is. It's an emotion. I mean, the Republican Party in 2020 literally had no platform. The platform was, we support Trump's America First agenda. And the American First agenda seems to be defined as, we hate liberals.
which is a very honourable agenda in a way, but one that I don't think anyone sensible could disagree with. But even it's a personality cult, onto which people can project whatever they want. Oh, Trump's going to help me, even though Trump's probably never taken a bus in his life. He doesn't know what the ordinary man's life is like. He doesn't know what it's like to live in average town USA. He doesn't know these kinds of people. And the way that it's brilliant, and George Bush was good at this as well, of making himself seem, George W. Bush, of making himself seem folksy and charming and sort of the ordinary man, when of course
through weird speech patterns. Don't you think? I think that was actually indispensable. Everyone criticized both Trump for his just bizarre and imitable way of talking and just going on these wild digressions, even worse than we do. But also just this, like I've always thought about this with when he gave these rallies and he'd talk about toilets, and smart college educated liberals would be like, this is just crazy. What in the hell is he talking about? But that was probably that was a feature, not a bug. That was his way of directly connecting with people. When he was like toilets, they used to be great in this country. You'd flush them, you'd go whoosh down the drain. Now through the environmentalist regulators, they don't want us flushing toilets. And I go to the bathroom, I have to flush 10, 12 times. I talk to my aides and they're like, sir, yes, you have to flush 12 times now because of the EPA. I'm joking, but this is actually an accurate representation.
Trump's turds are so solid and manly that he creates the best floaters in the world. When they get out into the Atlantic, they're a danger to shipping.
But again, I'm joking, but I'm not joking that much. That's literally what he would talk about. Or showers being really hot. Like you just turn on the shower and it'd just be this scalding steam coming out of the faucet. And a washing machine or dishwashers was another one. He just wants you want to put caked dishes in the dishwasher that you haven't washed for years. They're just covered in mold, and you just hit the button, acid comes out of the dishwasher. It's perfectly pristine.
He didn't even bother putting salt in. Didn't need salt. Our water was so American and so good.
Right. But that he connected to them. I mean, you can't say he didn't connect to them.
It's a very clever tactic, and it was something that Churchill was very good at as well. And Boris Johnson, who obviously hero worships Churchill, is very good at, which is that you have people that are actually highly intelligent that want to seem a bit stupid. It is politically beneficial, and I think maybe the problem with Biden was, well, he is senile, but maybe I wonder an extent to which it is a front. Maybe he isn't, because if you seem a bit stupid, then you can connect with ordinary people. You can get the sort of charm factor, the sort of motherability factor. You can give people the impression in a power dynamic that they might be able to get power, even though you're in charge. So this is important. Hitler was good at this. Hitler would have all these people squabbling beneath him, and he had this childlike quality, not a real man, sort of manlet quality. And so this would attract these Goerings and the Goebbelses and the whatever that would all compete for power. And Oswald Mosley, that was his problem. He was so dominant and so manifestly intelligent and powerful that there wasn't really that element, and he wasn't as motherable, and so the women didn't sort of like him as much. And so you get all, and Churchill would say things like, "Oh, I was terrible at school at this. I was terrible at school at that. I was no good." And then you got his people looked into it after he died, and they got hold of his school records. He was excellent.
Yeah,
he was badly behaved. Right. But he was extremely intelligent, and he was always in at least the top 25% of his class in any subject. So it's just not true that he wasn't particularly bright. He was lazy, but it's not true that he wasn't particularly bright. And but Johnson's the same. He's obviously an extremely intelligent guy, but and he's admitted that it is sometimes good to come across as being not entirely sure what you're talking about. And then when you do something,
he took also photos that I think were almost meme worthy. Like you would have all these just silly, almost grotesque photos. I remember seeing one of him where he was on like a zip line or something.
That's right. Yeah.
And his hair is off, and he's like looking like this, and kind of overweight, and just kind of like so goofy. But it was almost like the perfect photo, because it's like, how do you not love this like big polar bear?
Yes, exactly. The English like an underdog. If you come across as a bit of a buffoon, then they like that. Don't take yourself too seriously. People like that, and that was true of all of these kinds of candidates. The problem with Trump is that you're saying he would connect on that level, and he would say these things about quotidian issues which connected to ordinary people. But the problem is that he is also very, very dominant. In his manner, and that's what Biden wasn't, and that I think gave possibly Biden an advantage. It just made him seem nice in comparison to that impression you do, where he's always saying, "Oh, come on, guys, come on," falling off a bike. Isn't that charming? I fell off a bike once. I mean, we've all done that, and it's not a bad thing for him, I think, to do that. And that's the problem. It's not the conservative. There's the Australian Sky News. It's very, very right wing, and they did this report mocking the fact that he fell off a bike. Oh, he shouldn't be president. But I mean, I often wonder if he plans these things. I wonder if he's more intelligent than we give him credit for, Joe Biden. I really do, because it can't be that he's
interesting.
Senile. It can't be.
So it's a kind of it's a certain kind of strategy where you present yourself as defenseless.
Yeah, but not too defenseless. But to some extent, a bit defenseless, a bit helpless. Right. And this invites other people, if you are in a powerful position via that, because people trust you because of that, and you make them laugh and they like you and whatever. Right. To think, oh, well, I can get power. This person can be the jure leader, and I can really be in charge, kind of thing. And so it attracts in all these kinds of people. It's a very clever thing to do. And I think that's what Boris has definitely done. And if you contrast him with the guy that's deputy prime minister, Dominic Raab, or the guy that's chancellor, or the home secretary, they're all very different personalities. They're very serious people, and they're totally different from him. And they're competent. I don't know about Priti Patel is competent, but the Chancellor seems competent, and the Deputy Prime Minister seems competent. So there could be, but we've digressed severely from the.
Okay, let's get back to J6. So anyway, I found this fascinating moment in the hearing that occurred 3 or 4 days ago, and you noted it as well, because we talked afterward and we noted the same thing. This divine nature of the Constitution. And actually, Liz Cheney emphasized this in her opening and closing statements. She, in the opening statement, she said, she's very brief and concise, but you can tell what she's getting at. And she said, we need to put politics aside. Don't get hung up on that stuff. This is very serious. So she did want to make it, this is not a partisan witch hunt, and so on. And then she ended in the closing statement saying that we believe in the divine nature of the Constitution. And so she is a Republican at the end of the day. She is a Bush era Republican at the end of the day. But I think this is an extremely remarkable thing that you only find in a few countries. And that is I mean, look, there's never been a real separation of church and state throughout world history. I think every country has a civic religion to some extent. It's just inflated in certain places. I mean, a Roman would not. You are worshiping the gods of the state. That's how it was conceived, and no one thought anything of it. The idea that there'd be some, a weird god who was outside the state might be a little bit dangerous, though those did exist. But I think with Russia, with France, and with the United States, you have these inflated civic religions where it's all kind of mixed up into one. And those are two different countries. America is a fundamentally Protestant country, although there, I get the exceptions in there. But France is a fundamentally Catholic country. Russia is an Orthodox country. But I don't think anyone in Finland would ever even think to say that like Finland is the third Rome or something. It doesn't have that religious like quality that, Russia can never die. Russia has a mission on this planet. Russia is a civilization. France is the country of revolution. France has something, a civilizing mission. France has something to teach to the rest of the world. France is special in that sense. And America as well, I think the civic religion really conforms with a Protestant conception of the Bible and of Christianity itself. So this man named Jacob, who was a lawyer and right-hand man to Mike Pence, he said that, and he was set up for this by the committee. They talked before, and he said, I understand that you turn to your faith at a time of trouble. And he said, yes, I opened up my Bible and I went to Daniel 6. Now, Daniel 6 is a very famous chapter. It's very short. You can read it in 10 minutes or so. It's Daniel in the lion's den. And so Daniel is one of these very sophisticated Jews, or I guess kind of proto-Jew at that point, who is a right-hand man to the king of Babylon, and very similar to, Jacob being a dream interpreter and all these sorts of people who had some kind of relationship with pharaohs and so on. The second in command, the man behind the scenes. And people below Daniel were trying to get rid of them. They were jealous of this highly competent civil servant. And so they got the king of Babylon to say, well, you cannot honor any other god, and you should say this as a law. And they did this to set up Daniel because they knew that he would honor Yahweh. And so Daniel, as a devout follower of Yahweh, honored his God, and he was arrested and effectively put to death. So he was put into a cave with lions. Very reminiscent of Jesus emerging from the cave, you could say. And the lions didn't harm him. And so he came out of the cave. And then the Babylon king just threw all the civil servants into the cave with lions and their wives and children, by the way. It gets really bloody. And they were, of course, eaten alive. And you could hear their screams and howls. Great story. But Jacob was looking at this, and you can see the connection. And so the second in command thing is interesting. So basically, Trump is the king of Babylon, a pagan kingdom. And he said that. He said he was the second in command in a pagan kingdom. You can see that kind of resonates with a certain type of Christian perception of America. It's all pagans, and they're practicing homosexuality and witchcraft and so on. I'm just trying to stay true to Yahweh. But he was saying he was staying true to the Constitution. And so the Constitution in this way is the Gospels, or maybe even God. I don't know. But or Leviticus, the law of God. I think that's probably correct.
Yes, law.
And right. And so he again, he had a very Jewish conception of his role, but it was this devout man he will follow this law. He will honor Yahweh, even if that means his death. And so it was this heroic conception of Mike Pence as, being told to do something by Babylon.
I had never heard someone say this before. You have all this weird tension in American culture that you can't have prayers in public schools and things like this secular idea. But then you had this guy from whatever he was, the leader of the Arizona House of Representatives or whatever, or Senate or whatever it is they have.
Yeah.
God, there's so many layers of government in America.
I know.
Anyway, and he said that he believes the Constitution is divinely inspired.
Yes.
And I'd never heard someone say that, ever. I mean, you always hear these presidential candidates saying, "Oh, God bless America," at the end of their speeches. I've never heard someone say that the Constitution was divinely inspired.
Because you're not in America. That is not unusual. Now, you probably won't hear that from, I was about to say you won't hear that from liberals. You might hear that in a softer version from like Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi, actually.
So if that's the case, then presumably is that the case with amendments to the Constitution? Are they saying that the Supreme Court judges are acting on behalf of God? Is that what they're doing?
Kind of. I mean, look, not that conservatives won't criticize the Supreme Court when they act in a way that they don't like. But you could have wild opinions and conservatives will still accept you. Like, you could be a flat earther and the conservatives will be like, well, you've got good motivations. You're just wrong on this issue. But if you undermine the divine essence, the good inherent goodness of the Constitution and Declaration of Independence, they will never accept you. So I do think, I mean, this is what I would say, because I've listened to a lot of like smart liberals or leftists criticize the J6 committee, where they're like, they should just be going after Republicans as demons. It's effectively what they're saying. Like, all of Republicans are bad. Mike Pence is no hero. And I kind of agree. But I mean, on the Mike Pence issue at the very least. But I guess what I'm telling them is that, like, Liz Cheney and Nancy Pelosi are smarter than you are. They actually have to deal with the pragmatic necessities of power. And, you need a civic religion for this to work. And the Trump personality cult, as buffoonish and outlandish as it is, that actually is a danger. I don't think they could have achieved this coup, and it wouldn't have worked even if they had gone through with it. Even if they had hanged Mike Pence, that would have just, made it worse. They can't actually do a coup because they're too buffoonish. So that is a threat, but it is a threat to the government nevertheless. But you kind of need this civic religion. Like, it's very important for doofuses like Mike Pence and this guy from Arizona and Jacob, his lawyer, to be these kind of dutiful Protestant Christians who believe that the Constitution is divinely inspired. Those people support the state. You can function with that type of person in a way that you can't function with Trump. Yes,
that is true. So it is an attempt to, but it does mean that it cements their power. I mean, imagine if it was the other way round, and you were trying to have it was the Republicans that were in cultural power, cultural hegemony, and they were trying to get a cooperative Democrat party. And that we kind of interestingly did that in Britain with New Labour, at least for a period.
Yeah, definitely.
You had the Conservatives utterly economically, that was it, wiped the floor with them, and so New Labour was just forced to completely change. It never changed really. I mean, they were still the same bitter, jealous people, but they had to stop going on about economics, and instead they had to start talking about culture and homosexuality and whatever, because the economic question was just.
And Tony Blair kind of continued Thatcherism, at least economically.
He was the interesting idea. There's a book that's just come out about this. In Weber, the idea, Weber predicted that one day there would come the sort of perfect politician who would basically believe nothing. And would just be focused on getting power. And this guy argued, I forget the book, it's in this catalogue I was sent, that's what Tony Blair was. He was just this notion that Weber had, that one day such an appalling thing would arise. And
I think that's what Mike Pence is, and he's the Indiana version of Tony Blair. Like, Tony Blair is fairly posh, she's intelligent and articulate and so on, particularly in comparison with his contemporary George W. Bush. But Mike Pence is kind of the Indiana version of that.
But surely Tony Blair has a lot more sort of charisma, and he's a much more sort of dazzling character.
When you're in Indiana, you don't want too much charisma.
They
might question your motives or your.
It's a dull. Tony Blair and the ideal type. The ideal type is Max Weber's hypothetical leading Democratic politician, whom the author finds realized in Tony Blair, a politician emerging from no obvious mold, treading no well-beaten high path to office, with few affinities of tone, character, style, or belief. There we go. I think that's it. So that's it. The only other thing that you notice as well, in terms of the religious dimensions, you have it's chaired by that magic Negro concept that you seem to have in America.
Right.
So the kind of Morgan Freeman, deep, the judge in The Simpsons, sort of deep.
Yes, he's from Mississippi.
Black man.
I think that was also kind of smart. I have to say, he kind of has a certain charm to him, and I think in his word choice is also very interesting, because he'll go into Southernisms when making while formally referring to someone. So as opposed to, like, when he was talking about Ivanka Trump, he didn't mention like your father. He actually said your daddy. But it was very charming. Like, he kind of makes it like you're down in some barbecue joint in Mississippi, and he's talking. He's like, "Now, what did your daddy say to you the other day? Did he tell you to overthrow the election? Oh man, I love your daddy as much, and I love your daddy as much as I love these barbecue ribs. But there are limits. There are limits up in here."
Your daddy cannot overthrow elections, Vanka, can he? No. I mean, I guess though, to be fair, even if Trump is prevented from running, presumably there'll be some token candidate, won't there? Some de facto Trump candidate.
Yeah.
Trump will just be the kingmaker behind the scenes that's effectively in charge. Like,
yeah.
I mean, Deng Xiaoping never held formal office. I think he was deputy minister for agriculture or something, like deputy minister for transport, but everyone knew who was in charge.
Right.
So that's or when Putin wasn't president for a period of time and was prime minister. So that's all that happened. Right. So it's kind of in vain.
I do agree. I think I can also see MAGA. I mean, MAGA kind of moving away from Trump in a way, because Trump has no policies really outside of dishwashers and toilets. And MAGA itself has no real policies. I mean, when you listen to them, depending on their mood and the time, they sound like libertarians. They sound like working class social democrats, Bernie Sanders at some point. They sound like the religious right, just like an overtly Christian organization. They go off in all sorts of different directions. It's an emotional movement, and to that extent, they don't necessarily need Trump. They will continue with this, and I do think that divinely inspired constitution is a key to that. And you can see this. I don't know if you saw this, but the Texas Republican Party just issued their platform. And
yes, they refused to accept the election result. I saw.
It was wackadoodle. I mean, it was like, I mean, there's some things in there, to be fair. I mean, there's some things in there that were just kind of typical Republican stuff or fairly reasonable things. But it also had a quality of like a Facebook post or something. I mean, they referred to Biden as the acting president, as someone just kind of occupying the office for a time. They want to create an electoral college system in Texas, which would it's just this overt way of radically empowering rural people, their voters, at the expense of, say, Houston, Dallas, and Austin, and all those places. They said homosexuality is an aberrant lifestyle. I mean, that's going. They're really going back in many ways. I mean, I had assumed that the Republicans had just kind of moved off issues like that. What were other? Abortion should be totally outlawed. You don't need. I think anyone can take the bar exam without attending college, and professional licensing should be. I mean, it goes on and on and on this. And I mean, again, that's a party platform. None of that need be implemented, but the degree to which, like, regardless of Trump, I don't think Trump would endorse most any of those things that I said. Maybe the whole Biden's not a real president, but it's an emotional quality. It has a kind of collection of, a grab bag of like right-wing causes, some of which are kind of libertarian and anarchist, some are kind of sovereign citizen, throw in some gun stuff. I mean, it's this kind of blob that can kind of persist without Trump. And I don't think Trump has any kind of political agenda. And so I think that blob can and will exist without him. It doesn't need him.